Hello, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. How are you? It's so great to be here, and I am delighted to have all of you join us this morning on this bright and sunny morning. Not really, but we're just going to pretend and it's spring and there is no snow. So there you go. We're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to welcome all of our panelists. So that's what's going to happen next. And I'm delighted to be with you this morning, here with you this morning. Okay, let's see. I see myself. I see the wonderful Ian. I see Amy. I see Gunjan. And let's see, as the rest of our panelists are here too. I'm just so delighted to see everybody. It's just wonderful. All righty. So thank you so much for joining us today. We are in the third session of the Entrepreneurial Education Series, Customer Acquisition and Sales, Marketing and Branding in our new virtual reality, which you're experiencing right now. I'm Rebecca Harris. I'm the president of RUH Consulting, a PVCA board director, and the moderator of your program today. The series was created in conjunction with the Three Rivers Venture Fair, our flagship event that takes place every 12 to 18 months. And between the sessions yesterday and today, we're hoping to really equip entrepreneurs with useful tools and all the best practices about the entrepreneurial process, which is exciting to say the least. So what I'd like to do now is certainly, before we start, thank all of our symposium sponsors. Special events and programs like this are only possible because of them. And in addition to sponsorship of this series, our sponsors have generously committed to supporting the 2021 virtual Three Rivers Venture Fair. So if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please contact Micah Whitfield, PVCA's Director of Business Development. So now I'm delighted to introduce our panel today. They're so accomplished and they have such extensive bios that if I read them all in person, our session would be lasting until next week. So I'm going to do a very short overview and then encourage you to reach out to them in the future should your needs arise, and they can help you for sure. So Gunjan Agarwal is an IP attorney with Fox Rothschild LLP, and she is a bioengineer by training with extensive knowledge in diverse technology. She works closely with domestic and international clients to assist in patent drafting and patent prosecution, opposition and appeals proceedings, preparation of patent-related issues, due diligence, negotiation, preparing licensing agreements, and intellectual property assignments. Amy Baker, who is VP of Marketing for Ohot, Inc., and she's going to tell you about that. She's been a B2B technology marketer for over 30 years, and she has a distinct focus on marketing that drives business growth. She's held positions in marketing leadership at Ericsson, McKesson, Wombat Security, which was recently acquired by Proofpoint. And in her current role, she's leading the team to increase brand awareness and drive demand generation for their advanced analytics software platform, which serves higher education institutions. It's really cool. Joel Burstein. Joel is the founder and CEO of Keep It Simple Training and Development, an exceptional entrepreneur with 22 years of business development and management experience. He's trained thousands of people over his career, from Fortune 500 companies to regional nonprofits. He has consulted in numerous industries, including technology, healthcare, logistics, energy, financial services, entertainment, and professional services. And this is a man who knows how to ask for the sale, as he will tell us. So finally, certainly last but way not least, is Kyshira Moffett. She is the founder and business development and business strategist for The Power Collective. She has an MBA and is an award-winning serial entrepreneur. She's an international board-certified coach, an author, and she specializes in helping overlooked experts brand, package, and scale their coaching practices. She has a signature program called the Founder Circle, which helps emerging coaches drive revenue and results by creating their first high-ticket signature program. And in 2018, she was inducted into the Forbes Coaches Council, and she also assumed the role of the Pittsburgh Grow with Google Digital Coach. And just briefly, I'm Rebecca Harris. I am the president and founder of RUH Consulting, and I do private services, and I develop innovative solutions for nonprofits and for-profit organizations. I work a lot with intrapreneurial and entrepreneurial training. You might know me from my previous work at Chatham University, where I was the executive director of the Center for Women's Entrepreneurship for over 10 years. So let me just tell you how all this is going to happen. It's so exciting. Here's how we're going to look at the morning. And, it might have to go into the afternoon, but I promise it won't. I promise it won't. If you have questions, do not put them in the chat. Put them in the Q&A, and we will address them either as we go along or, throughout at the end. So we have broken our session into 4 parts. I'm going to spend 2 minutes first talking about some of the great pivots and best practices during COVID and some thoughts on the nature of work and how things will continue to change. And next, we're going to do a discussion of sales, marketing, and branding, specifically focusing on what business startups and early stage businesses must do in the new COVID virtual reality and beyond. And you really have to do this to thrive, not just survive. We're not just surviving here. Our third segment, we're going to look at the importance of channel partners and best practices to secure these. And finally, our last segment, we're going to discuss the importance of considering potential patent and licensing agreements when companies are in the process of starting their businesses in early stages of business startup. And I understand that there's a number of you who join us today virtually who are either startups or you are in companies or nonprofits that work with startups and do great work. And I welcome you all to give us some comments and suggestions and questions. And I'm really pleased that you're here. So 2 minutes on where I think we are. Here's a few important points that I just want to have you put in the back of your head and think about. We know that what we've gone through in the last year and our collective experience is like nothing else. And our countless losses are almost unparalleled. And not only the loss of human life, but also job security, financial security, and all of our well-being. So 10 million people remain without jobs. Numerous small businesses have shuttered. And so where is the light at the end of the tunnel? And I promise you there is light at the end of the tunnel. And here's what I think. If you look at some of the amazing pivots that have taken place from Thread International and Homewood, they were known for making sustainable backpacks. They went right into the medical grade face shield series. I'm sure some of you know how Spotify has changed and now is hosting its own original podcast, and that's really changed their whole formula. An amazing startup is Dr. B. If you have not connected with Dr. B, you can do so because they are now locating vaccine providers that have leftover vaccine, shooting them out to the people who have signed up. Opportunities, I think they're enormous. I really do. Robert Reich, who used to be the Clinton economist and his director of labor, his secretary of labor, he said he believes that shopping will no longer be just basics shopping. That's really gone by the way. It's going to be experience shopping. So what are we going to do with all those huge warehouses and stores? One of the thoughts is that we'll start packaging food in stores the way we package Amazon, and there'll be robots. Robots, I love robots, and so does Pittsburgh. There's huge swaths of commercial retail space. Are people going to go back, or are they going to go into Zoom communities outside of expensive urban centers? Are they going to go back at all? We know that baby boomers have had such a hard time getting and being able to get vaccinated. So is there a huge opportunity to work with them? And also we know that the rural community is not being served well with high-speed internet. And so I know satellites are going up. What opportunities do you see there? So I think those are some of the main considerations as we look at going forward, as you and your businesses. I want you to listen to their speakers and listen to our speakers and think about that. Make sure that you're doing some trend forecasting, which is also critical. Okay, so now we are going to start with the amazing Joel Burstein and Kyshira Moffett, and we're going to ask some questions and get going. All right, let's go here. Hi guys, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to see all of you. It's wonderful. So I'm going to start with you, Kyshira. You were really ahead of the trend in so many ways because you already had a totally virtual business long before COVID. Can you talk about the brand and the business you built and what it looks like and how you just like took them by storm? You didn't even have to practice or warm up.
I mean, from the outside looking in, it probably looked like that. But to me, it felt like being on a treadmill for like 7 years. So
That's how startups feel. That's okay. Okay.
so yeah, I actually started my business on the internet. That's how it came about. And when I started, it wasn't really something I looked at as a business. It was a part-time passion thing that I really enjoyed doing and decided to monetize after peer pressure from my friends because I was too nice. And I just found it interesting because for me, it's being in person was never really an option because I worked a full-time job. I worked 40 hours a week. So having in person just was never a thing. And as a coach, I'm really fortunate that by the nature of my work, it can be done virtually. So before Zoom blew up last year, we were on Zoom for years, leveraging Google Meet when it was called Google Hangout, and
Oh my gosh, right.
yeah, all of these other different, digital tools has been important. But I also recognize that for my practice to grow and scale, like I needed to be online. And so what that also looked like for me, though, from an in-person standpoint, was a lot of travel. So I spent a lot of my vacation days and weekends going to other cities and hosting events and speaking at other conferences to continue to build my digital presence, interestingly enough, tapping into that. And so when COVID became a thing, and I don't think I really realized how many people weren't online until I started to see people freaking out on the timeline on Facebook and Twitter saying, what am I going to do? And it actually made me realize how blessed I am. And so my business model, just to give some context, is 100% virtual. Up until last December, I worked with private coaching clients and that was when I worked with a little bit of everybody: startups, product, services, coaches, consultants. And we would work together either through really long strategy days over Zoom or over a period of several calls over several months. And my primary way of acquiring customers, which we'll talk about today, was actually through social media, email marketing, text marketing, and then ultimately closing through sales conversations via Zoom. So that's always been a thing.
Zoom that long ago?
Yeah, like it was always a thing. Like I never did like phone because video was just like, it was easier to be persuasive and doing all of those things. And so it was like business as usual when COVID hit. In fact, it was business as skyrocketed when COVID hit. I was pleasantly surprised to see how many people decided to pursue their passion projects and really branch out into entrepreneurship in March and April of last year. And that's when theoretically the phone kept ringing. Yeah, for sure. So and I was like, again, like I just felt like I built my business online. And so when brick and mortars closed down, granted I have an office space, like I said, it didn't change anything at all.
It's really interesting. So I think that's a great segue into talking to Joel. And the old way of doing cold calls and selling, and I've been selling since the cows came home. I mean, you would never do it over the phone. You would never sell like in a Zoom. So talk a little bit about, really your process pre-COVID and now during COVID, and what do you, in thinking about going forward and personal sales calls, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a different world. It's a different world, and I think it's actually a good thing. I think, not I've listen. The only people that ever say they love cold calls are the people that have never done them.
Well said.
You know what I mean?
Right. Well
Because
said.
it's even if you've done it for a long time, right? You get used to it. But I think there's a lot of things that pre-COVID are gone, right? So one thing that was real cool was we were able to run into people, and Pittsburgh's known for that, right? You can walk around downtown and you're going to run into somebody and you're going to have a conversation. You could be going to a coffee shop, you could be walking to lunch, you could be in an elevator. Those chance meetings were ways we thrived, and that's what Pittsburgh sort of offered, right? We missed them, and they're gone, like they're really gone. And so when you think about it, there was so many of those little bonding experiences that you're missing, right? Another great one is you'd walk into a meeting, right? You'd go up in the elevator, you'd talk to security, you'd go up in the elevator, you'd talk to the receptionist, somebody come out, potentially that person that you were talking to, you'd have a whole conversation, right. Then you'd walk back to their office, right? Or the meeting room, you'd talk on the way, you'd socialize, maybe it was art on the wall.
Close the deal, right.
Right, all of this stuff is happening. You're finding these moments, you sit down, you get coffee, there's this piece where you're just connecting, right? And then you do your meeting, and then on the way out, you're walking on the way out, and you're like, where's the restroom? And then they walk you out and you talk to them, and then maybe they ride down the elevator, they're going to lunch too, or maybe you meet somebody else, they want to introduce you. You know what we do today? You sign on, you start whatever you're going to start, and you do your meeting. When it's over, you click leave, and it's gone. There's right, like you've lost these bookends to really bonding, and that piece is pre-COVID, and so you have to get creative, right, on how to do that. And the new world is forcing us to do that through a bunch of different ways, which is what we're going to talk about today, right? There's social media ways, there's connected to LinkedIn, there's all those different things, but I think it, to some degree in the future, some of this is here to stay.
So let's talk about, how do both of you get qualified sales leads? Because you can't just go and say, anybody want a Zoom call today? Like, I'm just going to go on Facebook and see who's around. Like, that is not cool. So, Kyshira, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. So in our business, it looks like first just getting clear on our messaging and who we actually want to attract and who we define as qualified leads. I do think that sometimes when we're new, whoever can pay us and who's interested, we want them, but that's not always the best thing. So we have to actually define for us, what does it look like for someone to be qualified? And also on another note, not being afraid to turn people away who aren't. So that's one thing. So that looks like really clear messaging and our front facing branding, i.e. our website, having a place to call home on the internet, our website, having social presences on the major platforms, your Facebook, your LinkedIn's, things like that. Google My Business, just to quickly plug that, get a business profile on Google for free at google.com/business. So having those things that are having those things that are just standard and fully built out, fully branded, because let's be honest, if you Google a certain business and you can't find maybe a Google page or a Facebook page, we start to get suspicious. And we're like, I don't know, right? So those are some of the first things that we just have, on deck. And then from there,
a client comes to you and says, I have XYZ that I need to sell online, but I have nothing. So you just take them from
we can take nothing and turn it into an enterprise, but it's them coming with the right kind of business model though. So notice how presently we are very niche down and we only work with certain types of business owners. In order for us to attract those people, we have to be very clear with that messaging from the beginning. If I get online and simply say I work with businesses, I'm going to get everybody. That's not the ideal client. And so then the next piece is actually creating that omni-channel marketing presence that's consistent and impactful and powerful, that really drives home the transformation that we offer, and doing that on a consistent basis. So we track key performance indicators, as everybody does, and everyone's KPIs look different. In my business, video is the #1 driver for qualified leads for me. So that is where I put a lot of my effort and energy into live stream video, pre-recorded video. And from there, if someone watches, they're hooked, they're engaged, I'm speaking to their desires and their pain points and the transformation that they would love to have. Then from there, they go on our website and they actually have to apply, right? So when they apply,
so you're creating a barrier for them.
Yeah. So they apply, but then when they are applying, they're also scheduling the sales conversation. We have a fancy name for it. We call it a brand alignment session. So it doesn't sound so scary. I also reserve the right to cancel those calls just in case it's not a qualified lead. And people are honestly appreciative of that. So that's how I attract the leads. And that's what my pipeline in terms of like the client flow looks like.
And your specific client is, can you describe us the best client you could ever have? Go ahead.
The best client I could ever have is actually someone who's been in nonprofit or corporate for a number of years, who's ready to branch out on their own and start their own like educational practice. So the coaching space is very closely tied to the education space, which I can do a whole monologue on the rise of certificate programs, certifications, which I love, but coaching is so deeply ingrained with that. So right now I have someone who is an early childhood education expert. She's been in the industry for 20 years. She recognizes the inequities that children of certain minority races face with learning. So she's building a learning program that's for the children, but also coaches the parents, right?
So
she's already
Unbelievable.
coming in with the expertise, and my job is to help her with getting the business model set up. What's the packaging of this offer? What's the pricing of this offer? What social platforms are we on? How are we getting these parents in, and how are we closing that sale? And then how are we also setting your operations up so that you can actually grow a team and hire other experts to X, Y, and Z? So that's like
Excellent.
my ideal client in terms of background. Like, I have this expertise, but I want to do it without the confines of corporate. And they
Perfect.
already come to the table. So I can't teach you how to be an expert. You have to already know that, right? But what I can teach you how to do is now package what you know into something that can transform the lives of others and be profitable.
So really, you close the sale on getting the client who then will then sell. So Joel, talk about your process and the type of clients you have, and then your sales closing and when it occurs. Like, I just want to be a fly on your Zoom and see how that happens.
So it's interesting, right? Because it's funny how there's a lot of ways salespeople can be. A lot of salespeople are successful. A lot of people realize, think you have to be like this outgoing salesperson, right? But that's not the case. Anybody can be good at sales, right? Anybody can do this work. And I think that's what's fascinating about this. And there are so many ways that you can become successful. And for me, mine was always about referrals, channel partners, partnerships. That was how I did it. And in COVID, right, this has become even more valuable because I know what I want to be able to do is leverage warm leads. I want to be able to leverage everybody's relationships. I want to build, without saying it, a sales force of people out there that when they hear and understand opportunities, they think of Joel. That's what I'm trying to do. I want to extend that out. And that was always the theory. I didn't plan COVID, but that worked even more effectively because now there's less competition on the front end of a sales cycle because they don't know where to go. They're going to their friends and their colleagues because there's no chance meetings. There's all that stuff I just talked about that hurts us. It also helps you if you know everybody because they go back to the well. They go back to the people they know.
Joel, your ideal client, describe your ideal client who just like opened the internet today and goes, I need Joel, but I don't know it.
The person who says, Joel, I want to give you a blank check.
Okay, after that, Joel,
I'm kidding.
That is everybody's ideal client.
Right. No, the ideal client for us is probably it's a couple of different phases. Depends on the stage you're at. We work with a lot of companies that have CEOs that are candidly doing way too much work, and sales is still their main function. And so now they have to offload that work to a sales team. And typically the CEO did the work because they know their product, they know their business, and they're outstanding. That's why they're the CEO. But when you hire salespeople, not that simple. They're never as passionate. They're not as qualified. They don't have the experience. And typically great salespeople don't leave great jobs. They don't because they're in great positions and they're getting paid a lot of money and they've built systems. So it's very difficult to recruit quality salespeople. And so typically we get involved on that front end of it, of helping the CEOs transition directly to their sales teams. The other side of it is we have CEOs that are bringing in directors of sales, VP of sales. So now you're thinking about you have 10, 12, 15, 20 salespeople. Now you need systems. Now you need process.
I hate systems.
Now you need
I really
metrics.
hate process. As
Who does?
When you're an entrepreneur, especially for those of you who are listening, it's great to come up with a product or a service that like the world needs, like the next light bulb. But if you can't have systems and turn it over and have other people understand it, you don't have a business. So I think we don't always remember that. So you want to talk a little bit about that? How do you get those founders to say, gotta have a sales team? I have to.
Well, typically founders love getting rid of sales. Like that's the first thing they want to get rid of, which we typically coach them that that's a bad idea. Don't get rid of it because you hate it. That's not a great reason to get rid of sales. Get rid of sales because you can bring in somebody who could do it very well for you, or you can bring in, or because your time is being sucked in different areas. But don't get rid of it because you hate it, because what'll happen is you won't be able to manage it either, right? And that's a big problem because now you're going to have a drop off, and CEOs have to go from being the salesperson, which is a very different job, than being the sales manager. And so when you can wing it and do what you need to do, they're winging meetings, but they know all the institutional knowledge. You can wing a meeting when you have the institutional knowledge. Your salesperson didn't start it with you. They didn't run through the 350 sales calls you ran every quarter to understand exactly how to improve your talk track. And then
Exactly.
CEOs typically can't coach that because they're not designed to coach it. They don't know where their skills are. They didn't
It's
know
in
what it
your
was. They don't
gut,
know how to
right?
share
It's
that.
like, right, you just
Exactly.
live it and breathe it, and but you're right. You have to be able to sell when you start business. I one time went to a seminar and I said to somebody, "Well, so you're going to start a business?" He said, "Yep, the first thing I'm going to do is hire a salesperson because I hate sales." And I said, "You mean you're not going to sell your own product? How is anybody going to believe it?" He's like, "I'm not very good at that." I'm like, tough.
It's tough. That's right.
Tough,
It's very true.
tough,
It's
right?
very true.
Tough.
And that's part of the challenge, right? Is people genuinely don't believe they're good at it.
Right.
But I find that to be not the case because every child's probably convinced their parents to get them something that they really wanted when the parents didn't want to do it. Right.
Perfect.
And if you're parents, you've done it in reverse. You've convinced your kids not to do something. So we've sold a lot
Exactly
more
right.
people than we actually think we have.
That's exactly right. So, Kyshira, let's go back to you. So, you want to do sales. We're all selling. And in terms of content marketing, everybody sort of hears that word. They're like, yeah, I have content marketing. But what is content marketing? And why do startups have to think about it? And, even earlier stage, and then as you grow?
Yeah, absolutely. So in layman's terms, content marketing simply means the content you are putting online for the purposes of marketing your business. The reason why we think content marketing is so
Right.
much more complex than what it is because we've started to look at social media as a chore. And we've separated posting on social from marketing. And that's why it's typically one of the last roles we want to hire for because it's just low priority right now. It doesn't really matter. It's just something that we don't put a lot of effort and energy into, but we have to rewire that thinking and instead look at social platforms and of course other platforms, email, ads, all of that stuff. We have to look at that as tools within our company that we can leverage to get in front of the right people or build a relationship with those we are already in front of. And that would be in the form of like retargeting marketing or nurture sequences through email, things like that. So we have to start looking at our social media and our content like holistically, right? So if you're a company that loves to use YouTube, let's say you have your a site like ClickUp, which is a project management tool I just started using, and I love how they leverage YouTube.
Say the name of it again so everybody can hear it.
It's called ClickUp.
Okay,
and
good.
They post webinars on YouTube like every week on how to leverage their platform if you are a accountant or a course creator or a lawyer. And then they also have these short tutorial videos, right? So let's say you're a company like that where you like to leverage video to get people to use your product. Well, let's tie that in. Let's like take some of that text from that video, create some blog posts on the website that connect and reference the video to drive SEO. Let's chop that video down into 2-3 minute clips and post it on Facebook so we can drive traffic over to the website blog post, which will then drive traffic to the product and the sign up, right? So if we can look at it like a cyclical situation where it's like, hey, while I don't take for granted that my entire audience is on YouTube, let me see how I can leverage what I've created here to get traffic and audience from other places, right? And then also starting to track that so intensely so you actually understand what platforms are driving return on investment for you from a time spent basis and a budget basis, right?
Right.
So looking at it cyclically, and then also whenever I teach this class, I always talk about how we need to have goals. We don't have marketing goals. We have
goals
revenue
are just
goals.
like selling. Goals are just
and I'm
getting
sure
more.
Like Joe probably sees this. It's like we have revenue goals, maybe even client acquisition goals if you're lucky. But people never really have marketing goals. So marketing goals looks like your goal for engagement on your post, your goal for click-throughs on your post, your goals for conversion.
So mini goals is what you're
people
saying.
who come from your social post to the sign up page or the website and things like that. Because if you can track that, you now, again, you are starting to get KPIs. So when you are working on your next marketing campaign, you have something to start from and you know what you're trying to get. And I promise Instagram won't sound as crazy when you realize that you got 5 quality leads last week from posting repurposed videos over on Instagram. I'm just giving that as an example, but that's what content marketing looks like.
And KPI, for people who don't know, let's just define it.
So I did. It was key performance indicators.
Yeah,
so
let's
KPIs
just say it.
Key performance indicators.
Performance indicators.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And those are basically the data points that are driving your business forward. So for most people, they typically define them as the things that contribute to revenue, bottom line, or whatever is important in your business. You'll use KPIs to define that.
Perfect. So Joel,
Rebecca,
let's get your comments on that, please. Yeah,
because Kyshira said some really cool things in there. First of all, I started using ClickUp not too long ago, and I'm a huge
Isn't it amazing?
fan. It's
you guys are selling the company for them. Are they giving you
they need to be a sponsor of this.
I know we need to send them an email because we can
let's record this and send it to them. We'll split it, Kyshira, I swear. But I'm serious.
Offline, let's take this offline.
But the goals is a really important piece, and I think goals are critical because we think about revenue goals, we think of long-term goals. We don't think of all of the little goals that we need along the way, right? So we break down sales goals into behavioral goals, right? Daily, weekly, monthly behavioral goals, right? Because I'm not going to get everybody to do everything, at the end. I have to think about, what do I need to do every day? It's like eating a hamburger, right? You can't eat a hamburger in one bite. You got to take a little bite, chew it up, and then take another bite, chew it up. That's the way sales is. You got to take a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow, a little bit today, do the behaviors and be exceptionally consistent with doing the behaviors. Don't get frustrated after 3 months if your behavior isn't working. It's not going to. It's going to work in 6 months, 9 months. If you don't do it and get through it, you'll never get there. So it's important. So I wanted to touch on the goal part because I think it's a really important piece that I don't think we all focus on.
And when you look at key behaviors that you have found will really close a deal, because frankly, we're all here because we understand whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit, you really need revenue coming in. And that is the basis for a business. So when you look at those, what are they, Joel?
So I think there's 3 places you think about this, right? You think about prospecting, so finding new clients, selling them, so running them through a system, and then closing and finally asking for the business. And I think there's behaviors that you're going to have around all of those. Some of those behaviors are the ways that you prospect. Some of those behaviors in the middle, which is really the selling piece, is really having a strong process, owning your process and being good at your process. You see, when customers buy you, they don't know you. What they're actually buying is the way that you made them feel when you sold it to them. At some point, they're buying because they don't know it. They haven't experienced the product or service yet. So the picture that you paint in that sales process or on the marketing side is like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. That's what they understand. That's what they're actually going to commit to. And if that doesn't align, if your sales process isn't as efficient as your business is, you'll never get there. And people miss that. This is the first place they get to know you. This has to be strong, consistent, and that's the behavior. The behavior is saying, I'm going to ask this 5 questions before I tell them anything about me. I'm going to make sure that I know specifically about the business before their website. I know whatever those behaviors are for your business, they're critical that you do them consistently because there is nothing for showing efficiency on the front end of a sales process. There's no match for it.
So here's the question though, for both of you, and then we'll go into one last thing and then we'll take any questions and we'll keep going. We used to do that in person. People buy from people that they like. And we used to call on them in person and we used to hang out with them and we used to go see them, and we don't do that anymore. And the question will be, can we do it going forwards? Can we be efficient? I mean, think of all the sales meetings we've gone to, the conferences, those things could be a thing of the past too. So you really are doing this mostly virtually now. And can we do that?
So I think, and I still believe this, I still think about 20 to 30% of this is gone forever. But I do think about 70 to 80% of this will come back in some form or fashion.
Some form or
right?
another.
So let's say there were 3 conferences, maybe 4 conferences a year, right? Of the same thing, maybe however you do it. 4 conferences. Maybe one of those is now virtual. Are they going to get rid of all of them? No, but maybe 2 are virtual, right? That piece is going to change. Are you going to get a phone call from somebody going, hey, listen, I need you to be in California tomorrow, right? Or fly to Boston or New York or whatever it is. Are those things going to go away? Potentially. Are we going to still fly to California? Absolutely. We just may not do it overnight like we used to. I think those types of things are changing. I'll tell you why. Because in 2019, you couldn't do a sales meeting over Zoom because people would think you were nuts.
Yeah, they would. They'd be like, you're lazy. Common. What are you doing? Right. Except for, Kyshira, you did it, but you always were doing it. So it was different.
but she always did it. But overall, like that piece wasn't as common. Today, it's such a common way after a year of doing it that people will benefit from saying, listen, let's just jump on a Zoom instead of flying out, right? Like, let's figure this out. I think people will get more creative because of it. I think it'll be a win. It'll create efficiencies for us. So
Nice. So when we had our prep call, you really brought up the water cooler concept, but you've taken water cooler moments and made them virtual. So will you tell us about that? And then Joel, we're going to end with you and smoky grapes. Okay.
So yeah, so we were talking about the water cooler experiences. I know Joel brought up the example of the great Starbucks downtown at the Penn, William Penn, where we would all hang out and run into literally everybody. And we kind of talked about, is that like a thing of the past? And, you know, the thing that I've brought up is, again, looking at social media as a resource and really leveraging that to stay connected, right? So thinking about how we can use things like LinkedIn and Facebook to share those micro moments that we would talk about over the water cooler, like, oh, my kid just turned 3 or just had an anniversary. Like, we can leverage social media for that. And because when people already are doing that, that's our gateway to send a direct message or a private message and say, hey, I saw you just had a birthday. Can we catch up on the phone call? You know, I feel like people now are so happy to get on the phone because they're almost over Zoom. So they're like, yes, the phone call would be great.
Yeah, phone call would be great.
I feel like we're getting more yeses to phone calls now than before because people are just zoomed out, right? So really thinking about strategically, if there's people that you need to follow up with or connect with, how can we leverage the power of sharing, right, on social to reestablish those connections? So again, I would think strategically about how we're choosing to use these platforms, both from a personal standpoint and a business standpoint. But I mean, all else fails, like LinkedIn is like still a thing where we can share those appropriate personal moments, but also those professional moments that can actually drive conversation. So I think that that's something that we should really consider. And again, if we don't look at it as a chore and we look at it as an asset and a resource, we can do so much more with it.
That's great. And really, and it sort of goes without saying, is that you are your brand. Your brand is you. People say, well, I have a personal thing and a professional thing. And I was always like, no, it is all one. And now especially, it is all
when
one.
When you're a CEO or a founder, like it is 100% all one. And I would even say, I wanted to comment on the previous thing about like sales not really being done over Zoom. Like that's definitely like a real thing where I was a B2C business. So with B2C, I could set the rules. B2B was a whole different market. However, because of my personal brand presence on LinkedIn, I had B2B opportunities where all there was LinkedIn messages exchanged and contracts signed or phone calls were had. And I throw that out there to say that we should not underestimate the power of intentional sharing and branding and positioning ourselves as thought leaders and experts and go-to people in our spaces to create those opportunities.
It's very well said. So we have 2 minutes and we're going to turn to Joel and smoky grapes, because all of this and everything we're talking about is innovation, is ahead of the curve, it's trends. Take it away, Joel.
So it's funny because this one just sort of came out of nowhere, right? Smoky grapes, I'm sure you're all thinking, but what happened was we're all really concerned about what's changing, right? And what's interesting about this is what isn't changing. And I was recently on a call with a gentleman who owns a winemaking company, and he was talking about how in Northern California they've had wildfires, and the wildfires have affected the grapes. There's smoke flavor in the grapes. Well, sure enough, as soon as that started to happen and it became a problem about all the next set of wines being made, companies emerged that could remove smoke from grapes. And what's interesting about this,
unsmoky grapes, right?
And now you have unsmoky grapes. And what's fascinating about that is what hasn't changed is innovation. There is always opportunities for innovation, right? And just like that about sales, right? Sales is one of those things that hasn't changed. You have to always keep your antenna up for the opportunities that lie out in front of you. The minute your antenna's down, game over. If you can master having your antenna up for opportunities, regardless of what's going on in the world, you'll never fail.
Last comment from you, Kyshira?
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think that that is such an excellent story to wrap up on, because I forgot one comment I did have is
Mhm.
around how with COVID, so many new innovations and opportunities have came about. One I could think of is the platform Hop In, which is a virtual conferencing platform where they've created this opportunity where instead of it being kind of like this, which is so great, but
Yeah.
instead of it being like this, they actually created this interface where you can do speed networking via cam, and it would randomly put you in little huddle rooms so you can network with other attendees. And I spoke for a virtual conference where that was a thing, where they had actual dedicated time for speed networking. They had a vendor exhibit area where you could hop into different like live rooms and talk with their vendors, and they had sales, and they had things where you could buy and things would get shipped, and they had rooms for the sponsors, and they had their, so these things, this thing did not exist 2 years ago, right? When virtual conferencing meant we were doing a Facebook Live at the in-person event.
Right.
Now there are new opportunities coming about. So while yes, there are going to be some events that aren't in person ever again, that doesn't mean that these opportunities are going away. And so I think that it's so important for us to be adaptable and flexible and willing to adjust versus always holding on so tightly to what was, because we'll have blinders on to the new opportunities that are now visible.
That's exactly right. And you have to be thinking now in terms of trends and what will not happen next month or next year, but maybe in 5 years. And are you thinking about what your companies need to do to prepare for that? So I thank you both so much. You're going to rejoin us again at the end, but you all are totally amazing. So thank you again. Thank you again. So I'm going to bring in Amy. Amy, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
Great. I'm great. Thanks. So, Amy, you are our channel partner, professional, and expert. So, it's just so nice to see you, and your bio speaks for itself. But why don't you tell us right now about your current position, and then I assume you're doing it all virtually. So, okay.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm looking forward to the
Yeah.
discussion. So right now I'm working as the VP of Marketing for Ohot. They're a leading provider of AI for higher ed. So our platform helps higher ed administrators understand and make the most informed decisions they can all throughout the life cycle for higher ed, from recruiting to admissions to student success and even philanthropy at the end there. So really excited to be a part of Ohot. And yes, we have been working remotely ever since long before I joined the business in September, all the way back to March for a year, just like everyone else has.
Right. And as you heard from Joel, but the whole idea of taking these people through all this, but you have to have basically made the sale, so you have the client as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a lot to be said for those relationships that Joel had talked about, and how do you still build those relationships, and the pivots that had to happen from a marketing and sales perspective to still find other ways to build relationships remotely, which of course the whole session was talking about earlier.
Yeah. So let's define a channel partner, because a lot of people might have an idea of what it is, but why don't you tell us what it is and how you work within channels and what it means?
Absolutely. I mean, so my definition of a successful channel partner is another business that sells and markets to the same buyer that you have. So they already have built-in relationships to the very same people that you're trying to sell to, and they've already provided solutions for them that are valuable to that particular buyer. And so there's a built-in engagement there that already happens. It really speeds your time to sale. It really saves the time and the cost of acquiring a new sale. Because think about it, you're not necessarily having to do your own lead gen. You're not necessarily having to hire your own salespeople. You're not necessarily having to train process if you were dedicated 100% to channels, which most businesses are not, but it definitely could reduce overall sales costs.
And I think the really interesting point about this is the channel partner is already in selling a product or service to the client that you're trying to get to. So they have a relationship, right?
The relationship is really most of what you're buying. You're buying the relationship, and you're buying their sales expertise as well, and hoping that that can be leveraged into new ways and to sell additional solutions.
Excellent. So in the good old pre-COVID, pre-virtual, how would channel partners operate, and why would a company want channel partners? I mean, shouldn't they just have their own salespeople? Like, what's the deal?
Great question. I mean, it overall can reduce your cost of sales significantly. While you are paying the channel partner to resell your product, could be 10 to 50%, depending on the way the agreement works. It could be a lot of money, but then your cost of sale could be high as well. And it really does defray a lot of costs. So
Right.
the real benefit, like I said, is defray cost and potentially speed to market. Because if existing relationships are already there, what if you have a sales cycle that's 6 months long? But that gets reduced dramatically because of somebody who already has a relationship and already knows that there's somebody looking for a solution like this. You can shorten your sales cycle dramatically, and then your speed to revenue is much faster.
So interesting. So when you work and did all your marketing prior to COVID, when you work with channel partners, were those partners then going in person and making traditional sales calls? Like, give us an example from maybe your work previously and how you would do it
Absolutely.
now.
Absolutely. I mean, there have been times where I've watched the channel partner to product relationship be that there was somebody actually at the channel partner site sitting there full time, building those relationships and being there as an expert to answer any questions they might have about the product, to make sure that they are helping them move deals along. I mean, they could have been completely embedded with their sales force or their workforce. So that was the ultimate, of course, right? I'm just going to place somebody inside your business
Right.
to, weekly calls or maybe visits every month, or meeting them, of course, at trade shows and events when that was still a thing that we all did.
Right. It really interesting. And if I just look in the white pages or the yellow pages, which are no longer paper pages, how do you even find a channel partner?
It's a great question. I mean, I'd say channel partners, if you have the right brand and have proven that you're differentiated, and some of the things that Kyshira was talking about are so key. If you can really have the right messages out there, you will attract channel partners to you, because channel partners typically are trying to sell. Sometimes they're made up of companies who are just selling other people's products and they don't have any product of their own. Sometimes they have product of their own and they're selling in addition to their product.
Interesting.
And
And
so you will attract people to you if you have the right brand that's differentiated, that's solving a problem that they have not already solved with another product that they have, that their clients are requesting.
And so basically, I mean, it wouldn't be an exact competing product because they would probably prefer theirs over yours, but so complementary. I mean,
Complementary, adjacent. Once again, we're back to the buyer has to be the same. Who's your audience? That buyer has to be the same. And you have to be solving a problem that's important to them. And of course, that's the basic of marketing 101 anyway,
Right.
is you have to be solving a problem important to someone.
Well, and I think, as I've always said, do you have a product or service that people want or that they need? It's the old want need. Like, I need to have dark chocolate every day, but I mean, or unsmoky grapes, I mean, but
Exactly.
what do I really need? And can you turn a want into a need? And I think right now we're seeing more and more that people have really pared down, haven't they? I mean, the wants seem to have gone away.
It's a great point. And I do think that with smaller budgets and smaller wallets, even in B2B environment, people are going to be skinnying down the things that they purchase. And so you really do have to be incredibly differentiated. You have to be really crisp in your message. You have to be really clear about what value you bring, and focus instead not on how your product works, but so much about what results it actually delivers. And I think from a technology perspective, the natural thing for a co-founder or an early startup to do is to talk about how it works, because they're so excited about how it works.
Well, and they might have developed that process, right? Yeah.
Of course. And that might be the part that's differentiated, but somehow you have to get to the results that it delivers, and then really find a way to differentiate those results and why those results are so much better than another approach.
It's a really, really hard job. So in bringing channel partners to your organization, what does it require on the behalf of your company? And are there best practices for utilizing channel partners? How does that work?
It's a great question. So I think there are really 3 keys to success, and some of which I think if Joel could comment right now, he'd be applauding. The first one is you have to have an effective sales process. So you have to have been able to sell this product yourself, directly from your own sales force or yourself as a co-founder, and know exactly what works for your buyer. What were the questions that they asked? What were the things that really made the most difference in your conversation? What is an effective sales process? Because the first thing you have to do is train your channel partner how that works.
Right.
And if you don't have a process that works yourself, what can you share with the channel partner about what's working for you? And so what you really can't leave to chance is, oh, they'll figure it out because they're professional sales people.
Right.
It doesn't work like that.
It's
So
real.
job one is to make sure you understand why your buyers are buying your product, and you have to be successful at it yourself first. And then I'd say the second part of that is to be in regular contact. We talked about that embedded person. Like I said, that's an extreme situation, but it could be weekly phone calls talking about maybe new opportunities they've talked to. It's definitely following up on the leads with the partner early on so they can hear the way that you're pitching the product or talking about the results or the solution itself. So I think that's really job two, is that regular, you have to be in front of them. And the last part is, it's the 80-20 rule. So for all of the channel partners that you attract, only 20% of them will be really successful.
Like
And you have
really
to take all of,
superstars.
yeah, absolutely. You have to take all of that time and put it on that 20%. And it might be hard to ignore the others, but that's actually the best use of your resources, to look at that 20% and say, what can I do to make that 20% successful? And even
Right.
within each of those channel partners, maybe only 20% of their salespeople will be really excited about your product. And you really want to embrace those salespeople too, the ones that are passionate, who have successfully sold it, or who understand the value that it brings, are the people who you really want to spend all your time and resource for. So it's a lot of focusing.
So let me ask you another question following up on that. In the good old days, I sound like I'm ancient. You could go on sales calls with channel partners. They could follow you. You could mentor them. How do you do it now, Amy? Like, how does it happen?
It's a great question, but just like every other part of the sales process is working remotely, so is that, right? Is the weekly meetings are now on Zoom instead of face-to-face. I would definitely recommend a coffee or a happy hour. I mean, I think people have gotten so creative with the way they've built relationships online, with really
Wow.
interesting and engaging ways, like wine tastings that are happening from your house,
Right.
all those things that can happen. I think those things, we have to still find a way to embrace them and not just be business only. We have to find other ways to actually do things that are fun, even if it is an online experience.
Right, right. And as you're going about working in your new company, are you using channel partners? Will you use channel partners? What? Give us an example.
Great question. We did announce a really important strategic relationship with a channel partner earlier this year, and we are continuing to engage with them. And yes, it's an important part of our strategy as well. Part of our solution it's a technology solution, but there's a lot of need in higher ed to have maybe some more consulting help alongside that, because they might not have data analysts inside their institution who understand all the things that they need to leverage. And so a lot of partnering sometimes is to take that technology and apply a really knowledgeable person with it, so that then the buyer understands how to implement it internally. So instead of making an expert out of the buyer, you bring an expert with you.
Oh, I love that. And as you said, as my father always used to say, give me the money, I'll pay the taxes. So if you're paying these channel partners a large cut, you said 50, 60%, is that right?
I mean, shouldn't 50 should probably be the limit.
Yeah, okay.
And if you're really smart, it's more like 10 or 20 or 30, right?
Right. But I mean, if it's a sale you weren't going to have, right, and it's a huge sale, then it makes a lot of sense.
And sometimes it's about how do you capture that beachhead in those first few customers that then you can use as references for the follow-on customers. So if you have to pay a little bit more to get those first few customers, and that's what helps you get the next few because you build credibility and you feel like a safer choice, then that's definitely a worthwhile investment.
Wow, that's really great. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of building a company's brand during COVID as a means of not only credentialing your business, but also as a way to attract these channel customers. Because, I mean, the channel partners, because a channel partner is not going to come to you if you're like a dog business. Let's just say it like that.
Right. You're absolutely right. As we just talked about, skinnier wallets, lots of products out there, they're going to be attracted to good brands of companies that they either aspire to or feel emotionally connected to, because the brand is so much about emotion. So a really important piece of the branding piece is to build a depth of understanding and knowledge about your brand and what you believe in and what you offer, and those types of things, so that you're attracting channel partners to you. And they will definitely want to sell the best that's available, because that's their best way to serve those people they have relationships with. They've probably built relationships with some of these buyers over years and years. And they
Right.
want to make sure that they're not selling them something that doesn't live up to the expectations that are built around
Well,
it.
right, because then it would be their fault. I mean, it really is like,
Of
you brought me
course, and
that product.
that would ruin the relationship for a
Yeah.
long time. And so those are all things to consider, is you have to be true to your brand. And I think that's been mentioned earlier in this discussion. And then you have to, when you build that great brand that other people will really relate well to and really aspire and want to be connected to, channel partners will come, and then you'll really have to apply that 80-20 rule I talked about, because you won't be able to serve them all.
It's really interesting. So, can you talk about some pivots that your own company or your companies in the past that you've worked with have made to really build uh, brand strategies virtually? Because, it's a new world out here, and it probably is a new world that will continue. And let's talk about conferences while we're at it, okay?
Oh, great point. Yes, absolutely. I mean, so I would say when I joined, I thought 90% of our leads were probably coming in from trade shows and conferences. And of course, the company had already turned around and said, okay, there's got to be something else we can do to generate new leads, because they're not going to come from these conferences now.
Right.
And so, of course, it was about turning our attention to something that was probably too long overlooked, which was content marketing, and making sure we were building the right amount of content for the buyer's journey, so people understood exactly what it was that they could look to us for, what expertise we had, and building that depth of content so that any point that they were interested in either just learning more or maybe getting some best practices, that they would find that content from us, and that we became an expert in the industry. We also added public relations as an important element. So too often startups forget about public relations, or they're scared away from it. And it's really an important step in building a brand. Is awareness can't just be about sales. It has to be about saying the right things in front of the right people, even if you're not selling the product at the time that you're having saying those right things. And so adding public relations was really key into building awareness. We've seen our web traffic grow 25% or more as a result of adding public relations and adding more content into our marketing.
And if you had to pick the two areas, two or three, one or two, where you've seen the content marketing really pay off, is it on analytics? Is it on in LinkedIn? Where is it? Where is it?
Oh, great question. So for us, the targeting that we get from LinkedIn is really superior. And so that's where we really spent a lot of our time and our investment. We doubled our digital advertising spend on LinkedIn in the last 6 months or so. It's really paid off results. I'm sure that's helping our web traffic as well. And so when you combine the more PR plus the digital advertising, it starts to create some momentum. The one only caution I would probably have with anyone is never throw away a marketing tool. All the tools are in your tool belts for a reason. And I find so often people are somehow jaded about a particular tool. I've never looked at a tool and said, I'm just not going to do that. I don't believe in social media, or I don't believe in PR, or I don't believe in, you can't throw tools out of the tool belt. There's always a time and place for all the tools. And so you have to find a way to embrace them, even if you build on them as you go.
I love that. And maybe we'll stop there, because I think you're right. I know LinkedIn and Facebook much better than Instagram. So I'm like, Instagram, but Instagram, like, oh my gosh. So I think you're right. And even if you're not personally comfortable with them, and then you also have to look at, you really need to know who your buyers are. I mean, you need to know where they are and what they're doing. And I think that's, sometimes we just throw everything out there and go, oh, something will work.
Yes, spaghetti against the wall, I think is not, it's not really the time for that. And then to our point about channel partners, at some point, if you don't know the buyers very well, finding your channel partners who do know the buyers and have those relationships can be really helpful.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We'll bring you back at the end. I really appreciate it. It's awesome. All right, great. So our last segment will be talking about the most very important details that some of us might not really be as comfortable with, but it's the legal details, and the devil is in the details. So Gunjan, hi, how are you? Nice to see you today.
Nice to see you too. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Good, good. Well, I mean, your bio speaks for itself, your experiences, but let's talk about the types of IP, intellectual property, and how and when to protect them, because we have a lot of startups, and it might be that you as a startup are just going out selling because you got to sell, but you haven't thought about what you can protect. So go ahead.
Yeah, and before I get into that, we've heard such good advice about marketing, sales. My role is to protect your IP a step before that happens, because you don't want to be in a position where you're branding yourself as the Apple with the Apple logo, and suddenly someone else starts using it and uh, using your brand name to sell their own products, or someone reverse engineers your cool technology and starts selling it with something that you've worked on, you have put money into for years, and they start selling it. So
Does that really happen? Does that really happen?
yes, it does. That's what IP litigation is all about. Trade secrets, patents, someone else tried to copy your technology, or you weren't aware of someone else having a patent on something you have built, and you were unknowingly infringing on their IP. So it goes both ways.
Well, and I'm being a little bit facetious. I know it happens all the time, and I think for entrepreneurs, those of us who sort of have that in our blood, we just want to go out and sell what we did and sell what we made because we are so excited. So, but this process you're saying needs to come before any of that. So, what are the types of IP, and how and when should you protect it?
So there are primarily four types of IP: patents, trademarks, trade secrets, and copyrights. Each has different requirements of how and when to protect them. And it's not like one technology will be protected by patents and not the other types. For example, a Microsoft software has copyright protections, it has patent protections. The name itself is trademarked. So you can have everything in there. Let me start with trade secrets.
Okay.
Trade secrets are something that are protected by virtue of them being a secret, and they provide some financial value to you. It could be your customer lists, a recipe, your source code for an algorithm, or anything that's secret. How is it protected? You have reasonable precautions to prevent its spread. For example, you have non-disclosure agreements in place, you have physical security measures. If someone comes into a building, no one can leave with valuable information that your company owns, and those sort of things. Trade secrets are protected until the public knows about it. The very opposite is a patent protection. Patent protection, you have to apply for a patent application that goes through a review process by the United States Patent Office. And you get exclusivity to practice your invention once a patent is granted for 20 years. The flip side is it's available to the public. So when you file an application, you include information in there so that someone can look at the application and know what your invention is, how you're going to practice it.
That's a problem.
It's a problem, but you're getting a 20-year exclusivity in return for it.
So that's first to market. That's the definite first to market, because you want to be out there if you've got it, right?
It's first to file. So you might. Again, there is a play between trade secrets and patents. You can keep something a trade secret, but the risk is if someone else comes up with the same invention on their own or steals your IP, then you don't have any protections because you don't have exclusivity. But if you file for a patent, you're disclosing it to the public with the anticipation that you'll get that 20-year exclusivity. So even though public knows about it, you can prevent them from selling or using your patented technology.
Excellent.
The third one is trademarks. Those are very important. As I said, you don't want your brand name to be used by someone else. You develop all this goodwill by providing best services, best products. You don't want someone else to use your company's name or logo or product design, sometimes even like the packaging, to mislead the public as its origin being from you rather than them. So how you apply for trademark protection is, again, you have to file a trademark application that goes through a review process. And once it's registered, you just have to pay some maintenance fees and continue using it. you can search for trademarks that already exist using a public database. It's called the trademark search database or the test database. So one of the first things that companies do before even incorporation is think about a name, and they can go to this database, search for it, and if a trademark exists, think about something else. So
right, like don't take that one. Don't do it.
So that's one of the most important steps I think companies to do. It doesn't cost anything. You can do it on your own and then register for a trademark. Because as your brand value grows, you can start associating the trademark with your company.
Right.
And finally is copyrights. Copyrights are any works of authorship that you have created. It's original works of authorship. So for example, your branding videos, you have advertisements, you have employee handbooks, or anything that you have come up with, you can apply for copyright protection. You can you can either apply for a registration or use common law copyright protection, where you just say this is copyrighted, don't protect it. If you want to enforce a copyright, you have to first register it.
Right. So it's got to be registered. You can't just put the little C on the bottom of your stuff and expect it, right? I mean,
for enforcement, yes. And it's very important for technology companies where you have source code of software that you have developed. That's one thing that companies really want to keep protect. No one else should be able to use it.
Is the source code protection usually under copyright, under patent, under trademark? Where are you?
Copyrights. So that's the source code. The algorithm and what the source code does can be protected under patents or trade secrets.
So the algorithm and then what the source code does is like a trade secret. I mean, it's the old fashioned, this is the ingredients they put in Coca-Cola, and then this is how they made it, I mean, the old school marketing, right?
Yeah. One thing I would also like to talk about with respect to copyrights, in addition to thinking about what you can protect, also think about what information you're using from the internet in today's digital world and not use it without thinking about copyright protection of other people, of third parties. You don't want to be infringing on someone else's copyright. You took someone's source code, copied it, and made some changes, but that may not be enough for you to use it.
Right. No, that's a really good point. I mean, when you go and you take somebody's quote and you don't attribute it to them, it's the same thing. So you pull a source code, you change a few things because you're usually great at doing it. That does not mean it's yours.
Yeah. So just be careful, have policies within the organization of what sort of information you can use from the internet, even for things like your logos. If you start using someone else's picture, someone has taken a digital photograph of can sitting on a nice beach side and you want to use that as a logo, but think about the copyright implications before you do that.
So we had talked a little bit about open source licenses. So what does that mean? And then go ahead.
I was talking about copyright protection for software. So open source comes into play with respect to copyright. Typically, proprietary software is something that someone else owns all rights through copyright protection. Open source is when they have dedicated it to the public for the good and betterment of technology and science, but they come with their own bells and whistles. These open source software are dedicated to the public using different types of open source licenses, depending on what sort of license is associated with a source code. If you make changes to it or incorporate it in your own technology, it could become viral. That is, you are obligated to open source it to the public. You can't derive commercial advantages from it.
So that was like the original Linux when Linux started, right? That was open source. I remember. Okay.
Yeah. So that's where open source comes in.
And let's take this question really quickly. What distinguishes, thanks, John, design versus utility patents? I hear about that a lot. Go ahead.
Good question. So design versus utility patents are two different types of patent protections. Utility is directed towards covering the functionality of a product. So they're directed to machines, processes, compositions, or products. Design patents are similar to trademarks, so they cover the ornamental design of a product, not the functionality. So think about light bulbs. If you come up with a cool design of a light bulb that's going to be associated with your branding, then you can apply for a design patent. Again, if it has some functional aspects to it, for example, it dissipates heat more effectively,
Oh,
then
interesting.
that'll go in a utility patent versus the design itself goes in the design patent. Their design patents are much cheaper to get and they are granted quickly. The prosecution of a utility patent takes anywhere between 2 to 3 years, depending
Wow.
on the technology area.
Wow.
Design patents, 6 to 7 months, and the cost associated is also very low.
Great. So we're going to talk about something that's going to make everybody get really scared, but you should. Let's talk about working from home during COVID and best practices, because people have computers that aren't secure. They're bringing home all the secret agreements. I mean, what's going on? It's like a lawyer's nightmare.
Yeah. So, as I said, IP is a valuable asset and it should be protected, especially during these vulnerable times. And depending on what kind of IP you are protecting, you should take different steps. For example, if it's trade secrets, which I said rely on it being kept a secret, you should have robust agreements in place. Your employees should sign non-disclosure agreements, comply with your privacy policies. And you should have agreements in place that enforce compliance. So have some indemnity clauses in there. For example, if your customer list is the key to your business,
Right.
and an employee has access to it remotely, think about encrypting it. Your employees already signed NDAs, but remind them of it regularly, that this is your responsibility to keep it secret. Don't keep it lying around for your kids to scribble on, those sort of things. If it comes to patents, I think the most important thing that comes into play is ownership issues. With the pandemic, there is a lot of collaboration going on between different companies. So have well-drafted agreements in place that address these ownership issues. Who's going to own the IP that comes out of a collaboration? Where and when the employees can work on it. Sometimes you are just providing materials, but in COVID, that again becomes, if you're just providing computers, you could still own IP. So define that from the beginning. The other issue that comes with it is your employee agreement may say that in the course of your employment, anything that you come up with is company's IP. But if you're working from home, when is the employee working for the company and when are they working on their own? So have them keep detailed logs of their time outside of their employment. Again, reminders, employment agreements are key. And finally, if trade secret protection is becoming too onerous, think about filing for patents. It's a first to file legal world. So get something on file. If an invention is really important, file it, and you're not going to get into issues with something getting leaked.
I think that's really important. So I know we're kind of coming to the end of our time. I'm going to ask you one more question. We'll bring everybody back. But you had talked about really looking at predictions for the year 2022 and what startups need to do. And do you think that there's going to be a big increase in the number of patents that are getting filed?
So during COVID, the predictions were that the patent filings will go down, but that hasn't really happened. They have held steady or even increased in certain technology areas. The reason being, as employees are working from home, companies are asking them to file more IP, focus their resources on filing IP and geared towards selling products when COVID ends. So I think for startups, it's important to do their due diligence before they start selling products. There might have been patents that were filed during the last year for something they've been working on. The other thing I would recommend is don't forget to file for your own protections. I know it's a financial burden, but for example, think of patents, design patents is a good option, or provisional applications. They give you, they're not as expensive. They give you a 1-year time period where you can, as you're working on your products, as you're thinking about finances, to take advantage of that 1-year period. And certain technology areas that relate to the pandemic, the USPTO has reduced the filing fees and other costs associated with prosecution. So look into those. So don't forget to file IP. And finally, I would say, like, use this time, if you can't spend the money on filing for protections, use this time to work on doing your due diligence and working your products around what's already in the market. Keep good record keeping practices. It's first to file, but if you're keeping it a secret, establishing the dates when it was, when you came up with the invention and fine-tuning it, keep good records.
Keep good. So we're going to take one final question from the audience. We'll bring everybody back and just give us a couple of minutes. We might go over a few minutes, but that's okay because it's rainy and yucky and you're not going to walk anywhere for lunch today. So the last question that we got was, this company is identifying potential IP. If our process is similar to that used by others, is it still termed your own intellectual property? I believe that's right. Yeah. Is it still termed IP? For example, most steel companies use a version of the Bessemer process, and this company does 3D printing. So what do you think about that?
It's still your IP. So for example, if you have lab records that are documenting the process, that's your IP. That can be a trade secret or even copyright. One thing I would recommend is think about if this Bessemer process is an old process, so there may not be any currently active patents on it, but do a quick patent search. Go to patents.google.com. It's like a Google keyword search. You can see what already exists. If someone owns a patent on what you are working on, then you may need to think about design arounds. But things like Bessemer processes, they have been around for so long. The process itself may not still be under patent protection, but its particular uses may be. So
well said. Yeah, right, exactly. And I think that's where at a certain point, sometimes as a startup, you think, I can't afford to get a lawyer or an accountant. But let me just tell you, for all the businesses that I've had to, it's probably the best money you could ever spend, because if you can solve these issues before there's a problem, it's really good. And then you go forward and you know what you're doing. So
yes. And as I said, some of these things you can do it on your own quickly. And if there is an issue, definitely.
Definitely. So let's bring all of our panelists back up so you guys can say hello and goodbye one last time. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists. You all are truly remarkable. Please reach out to all of them if you have questions or you could use assistance. They're available. And I don't see any more questions in the chat right now. So let's just do a round robin of one sentence, like best advice. So my best advice is follow trends that are happening and follow the money, because that will show you where some big things are happening going forward. Amy.
I would say make sure that you're both working on your sales and your channel process at the same time to get the most bang for your buck from a sales and marketing perspective.
Nice. Kyshira.
My tip is actually homework for everyone. So if you're already on social media, what I'd love for you to do is go and download your most recent analytics report. If you're on Facebook and you have a business page, you can download it as a spreadsheet, and all of the other platforms have very similar options, and you can actually filter by date. I want you to go pull your analytics and start to
Nice.
develop some insights from it so you can create your plan moving forward.
Love it. Joel, you want me to buy some smoky grape technology, but I'm not doing that today.
Not today, not today. Don't be afraid of structure. Discipline equals freedom.
Wow, got to sit on that for a minute. And you're right. You're right. You're right. All right, Gunjan.
Think about IP from the beginning of when you form the company. There are different forms, and don't be scared of thinking about IP. It's the best way to protect yourself is to think about it, do your due diligence.
Perfect. Well, thank all of you who are here online with us. Thank you for attending. A survey link is going to be emailed to you at the end of the entire series, and your feedback is so appreciated. And again, I thank all of our sponsors. You make programs like this possible. Our final session of the Entrepreneurial Education Series will be held today from 1:30 to 2:45, and we'll discuss best practices in recruiting and running startup boards. So please visit thepvca.org for more information. And again, thank you for joining. We look forward to seeing you later on this afternoon. And thank you, panelists. You guys rock. Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.